Alright guys, so yeah, in this video I'm going to talk about emotional health, because at the end of the day, without good, excellent emotional health, you'll never be happy. And really, in one sense, it's kind of what life's all about. Everyone wants to be emotionally happy and content. But there's not much focus on it, and people don't really understand how to be emotionally happy and content. So this video is going to be about that, and hopefully in the future I'll have some sort of interactive system that will help people improve their emotional health. So the first thing to talk about when it comes to this topic is that the top of the pyramid, so to speak, or the linchpin, is your physical health, because your brain is basically a chemical organ, and without the correct nutrients, hormones, the correct balances of the ratio, sodium potassium ratio, calcium magnesium, etc., you're not really going to be able to provide yourself with a foundation to create excellent emotional health. For anyone that's been doing the Nutritional Balancing program, you'll realise that when you're detoxing a metal, say mercury or copper, it's pretty much impossible to kind of be happy through that process, because the toxins override the brain, overwhelm the brain and different organs, and you can't help but feel various different things like depression, anxiety, fear, anger, etc., etc. So if you're walking around with all of these toxins and imbalances, you're fighting against a brick wall when it comes to having good emotional health. Now, the next thing to discuss is that a lot of people, including myself in the past, thought that, well, if I just do the program and heal myself, I'll be happy, I'll have good emotional health. That's not really the case. Well, it's not the case that, from my perspective and the perspective of hundreds of people that I've spoke to and worked with. So the next thing to consider is when your health is much better and you have the foundation for emotional health, the next thing you need to look at is the human biological norms. So just like any animal, we have biological norms that we've evolved throughout hundreds of thousands of years, even millions of years really, that enables us to have good emotional health. If you want to go back to basics, take a bird for example. If you lock a bird up in a cage, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to think that that bird is not going to be truly happy, because it's not really living out its emotional health. A good example is a dog. A lot of people have dogs, and you'll see them completely change when they go out of the house into nature, and they're running around, they biting toys. They love toys because that basically represents sort of small mammals that they used to go and hunt down and chase. And I know my dog in particular, you take him out for a walk and you come back to the house, he don't want to go back in. He wants to stay outside. And that's because his emotional needs were met. His biological needs were met. Now, humans are slightly more complicated, because they tend to have more complex needs. So I'm just going to talk about a few of them in this video, and some tips and tricks on how I keep my emotional needs met. So really the best way to look at it is if we take ourselves back ancestrally, when we used to live in communities and tribes, and you'll get a much better idea of our biological needs, and also why people are feeling so terrible these days in the modern day society. So back in a tribal setting, one of the first things that we was exposed to is nature. Now, what's interesting is when people have got money, for example, you'll notice that one of the things that they'll do is they have time and money to go out into nice places. They'll go to the countryside, they'll go and hire an apartment by the beach. They'll go to these glamping where you can look up at the stars at night. Anyone will know that sitting around the fire at night with some friends is kind of priceless. And the reason being is that, nature in many ways is our home, what we've grown up with, just similar to a dog. So I'm not saying, go and live in a bark shelter, but I'm saying that sort of if you can expose yourself to nature a little bit more, you'll just naturally feel more emotionally healthy, just because that's what we've grown up in. But that's not really enough. There's other more complex things that humans need. One of them is social interaction. We are social animals, a little bit like a wolf. You think of a wolf pack and you think about a lone wolf on its own. Is that wolf happy? Well, no, it's not happy, because it's used to being in a pack, like monkeys, for example. You can look at other animals, like polar bears, for example, that are used to being on their own, and studies have shown that they have certain chemicals in their brain, unlike pack animals, that means that they're actually quite happy when they're on their own. But humans are not really like that. They need social interaction, which is sometimes difficult to achieve when you're feeling ill, but it's definitely something to be aware of. Another need, which is, again, looking back at our past, is the need to feel belonged, the need to feel like you're part of something. And one of the issues that we have these days is that back in the past, we was part of a community, we knew exactly what we're doing, everyone had the same spiritual views, everyone had the same moral views in general, everyone knew their role, male and female role. And one of the problems that we've got these days is that we're literally free to do whatever we want. But the downside to that is that although we have immense freedom, we also have immense individuality. So you can live with someone and they can have a completely different spiritual outlook to you, they can have completely different values to you, they can have completely different ideas of male-female roles, and you can feel like unhappy because you're surrounded by people, you don't feel like you belong anywhere. And that's why we're finding good, healthy friends. People talk about finding your tribe. The reason why they say find your tribe is basically because of what I was just saying, with feeling belonged somewhere. So yeah, that need for me got met when I started meeting people that was more on the same wavelength as me, flatmates, partners, etc. And sometimes it's really difficult because you've got to be aware of all of this knowledge to pick out good friends, to pick out good partners. I've definitely been in relationships in the past where my partner was spiritually a different religion, or they had completely different ideas around I've just found £5, great. They had completely different ideas around sort of sex, for example, and that causes problems. So you can start to see why people struggle so much, because meeting these emotional needs in the modern day is actually quite challenging. Now, I also believe that males and females biologically are different, and in the past, male and females had different roles. Males tend to be more yang in nature, they tend to be more directional, they tend to be stronger, and women tend to be more communal and sort of spacious. So often in times we will be with a partner and all of a sudden, even though it's going well in the beginning, people start feeling anxious and start thinking that there's something wrong. And I believe that the biggest reason is that we're not, again, meeting our biological needs. So one thing that men did, and I don't want to generalize too much, but in general, men tended to go out as a pack away from the communal tribe and go out and hunt and go out and be physical in general. And what that tends to do is men are together with men, and they generally talk about their issues with men, and they generally have camaraderie with men, and they go out and do dangerous things in general, and they raise the testosterone, and that makes them feel like they've got purpose because they are providing for their family or their community. So this is another problem with males in particular. When they don't have work, it really seems to mess them up much more than a woman, for example, who in general tend to be more content, living in more of a communal environment, and raising children. There's many studies on that, and there's reasons why marriages fail so much these days, and I believe that that's one of the main reasons why. So you've got to start to become aware of all of these needs, and you can even get quite specific, away from the basic needs. Sleep, for example, is a big problem that people have these days, and you've got to realise that if you're stuck on a computer at night, or you've been working too much at night, or whatever, you've been stimulating yourself, people find it difficult to sleep, and they find that confusing. But the reason is that we're just not in alignment with our biological needs. So all of these things can definitely improve your emotional health if you understand them. And the way that I deal with this is I basically have a bit of a routine around the program. So I do the coffee enema and the saunas and the supplements and food, etc, 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 and that sort of ensures that I'm keeping up with my health, biochemically. But staying in the house all day doing the program doesn't meet my emotional needs. So I've talked about it before on the YouTube channel. It's called Love Tanks, and basically I write down sort of on my interactive healing system that I'm developing at the moment my needs. So my need for social interaction, my need for family time, my need for stimulation and novelty, because that's another need. One thing that you'll realise in humans is that their needs are quite this sort of yin and yang balance, and sometimes paradoxical. So we have a need for security and stability, which we got from the community, but we also have a need for novelty and mystery and activity, which we used to get from going out and every hunt, for example, or every time we switched camps seasonally. That was a novel experience. That was new. It was mysterious. You had to find new plants. You had to find, every hunt you went on was with a different animal, and you was in different environments. So that's where the novelty comes from. So sometimes you might be in a relationship, for example, and the relationship might make you feel super secure and stable, but all of a sudden you start feeling anxious. And one of the reasons is because you're sort of stuck in the house, not doing much, and you thought it was all right in the beginning, then all of a sudden a need for stimulation, novelty, mystery starts to creep up, and people get confused as to why. You can actually flip that to the other side. You might be in a relationship where your partner is all about activity and novelty and doing things all the time, and every day is different. But sometimes these individuals don't really give you much of a sense of security and stability, because they're just running around like a bee, just not stopping, just constantly doing stuff all the time, and that makes you feel anxious too. So you can see, as I'm going through this, why people struggle so much in their day-to-day life. Loneliness, for example, is huge, and loneliness basically touches on all of the things that I've talked about. If you're on your own without the community or the camp, you feel lonely. If you don't belong to something or some people or some place, you feel lonely. If you're around people that don't think the same as you feel lonely. So lonely is not just a word that means that you're not surrounded by people. It's got this real complex intertwining aspect to it as well. So yeah, what I would say is a good idea is to write down some of the needs that I've talked about, and on a scale of 0 to 100, you write down how far that tank is filled up. And you might find that your social tank is really small, or you might find that your family tank is really small, or the stability tank is really small, or the community tank is really small. And what you do is you plan things to basically fill up them tanks. And 1 week you might be like, you know what, my social tank is feeling really low, I'll plan some activities to do with friends, and at the end of the week that tank might have filled itself up to the top, and you have that anxiety that you was feeling sort of disappears, and that's when you've sort of got to balance out other tanks and stuff. So yeah, this is a system that I'm building that hopefully I'm going to be able to release at some point. It's in its early stages, but every day I work on it, and the way it works is that every day I work on the system, and every day you tweak it, you make it better, you figure out what needs improving, you figure out what you're lacking, and you come up with a system whereby you sort of plan out, in a sense, your emotional health. Now, this is not too dissimilar to how we used to live in the past, because it was our environment and nature that basically planned for us. If we got hungry, we had to get up off our backsides and go and find stuff. But that used to fulfill the needs of activity and novelty, and all that stuff. At night time there wasn't any computers or TVs, so nature basically solved the sleep problem for us. The lack of community, we used to live in communal groups, so that wasn't an issue that people used to have, this feeling of not belonging somewhere. So, as you can start to imagine, you've got all of these needs that you need to meet in the modern world, which is, ironically, we're so connected, but at the same time we're so massively disconnected. And I personally think that when you master this way of living, you will master your emotional health. And of course, not every day is going to be, amazing and completely happy or whatever. There's always going to be problems that crop up. But what happens is you become quite content. So, you don't get yourself into this sort of sadness, which a lot of people are in at the moment, where they're trying to find happiness and trying to strive for it. There's a certain contentment there. So yeah, that's it for this video, and I appreciate it's been a long one, but there's been quite a lot to discuss, and hopefully you'll take on board what I've said, and I'll see you in the next video. Ciao.